Hey everyone, and welcome back to the show. I'm so excited to announce our very special guest, Matt Picheny. Matt, thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thanks. It's my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, everyone, Matt has a very interesting background. He's a former actor, and he's focused on developing passive income streams that enable investors to write their own story and choose how they want to spend their time. He specializes in revitalizing and elevating communities through real estate investment, community enrichment, and the arts. Well, that is a wonderful vision. Matt, would you please take us back in time and tell us, what got you started on your real estate journey?
Oh, yeah. I my father a long time ago was a real estate agent. He actually had his own brokerage doing real estate, residential, and he ended up getting involved in another business. He got in the food service industry, but when he first did that, when he was doing the real estate, he did rent. He bought a single family home that he rented out, and I don't think they had it for a very long time. It was him and his business partner, but I do remember specifically going there as a little kid. This was in Florida where I grew up, and there was a pool, and the pool was like disgusting green algae pool. And we went there over a series of several days, and he cleaned the pool, and I guess put in the chlorine or whatever. And at the end, the pool was beautiful. And I remembered him telling me, that this was a, a house that we owned, and I didn't understand that. I think I was probably around 7 or 8 years old at the time, and I just didn't. We had a home that we lived in. Why do we need another home? And he explained to me that this home someone else would live in, and that they would pay us rent. So at that early age, I kind of understood the very basic concept that one could own a property and rent it and make money from that. That was really the extent of it. And then fast forward probably about 20 years or so until I was an adult living in New York City. And I started having some money to invest in things. And the first investment that I did outside of Wall Street was actually a property that I bought. I had bought a primary residence, and within a matter of a couple of years, quadrupled the equity in it and sold it and got a better place. And so thought real estate was a super powerful tool. And so my first investment property was a piece of land on a lake community in Connecticut, where I eventually built a house and rented the house out as a vacation rental. And that's kind of where it all started. That was I didn't I, At the time that I was doing it, I thought I was building a second home for myself. I lived in New York City. Um, and it's all concrete there. And I wanted a sort of weekend getaway where I could be around a lake and some trees and things of that nature. What I didn't understand was the demand that there would be for a rental home there. I also didn't quite understand the economics of it all. I never went into it for it to be a rental, so it wasn't extremely profitable, but it set me on a path. It was a long journey, building the house. You built first buying the land and then planning the house and building a house. And I learned a lot from the ground up on what goes into the building of a home. Um, but then I started to learn all these other things when I was renting out the property, about renting properties, marketing it, screening tenants, and then the really fun stuff like taxes and accounting. And so it was a deep dive, I think, without really realizing it was going to happen, into property ownership as an owner of property, and renting it out to tenants. And so that really set me on the path that I'm on now. I mean, fast forward another 10 years, and now I buy large apartment complexes in several locations, and we've been doing that pretty successfully full time for about 6 years now. But yeah, I guess it all started with that green algae pool.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I definitely, it's a great journey. And I want to definitely touch on, what you're doing more today. You mentioned before the show that there was another part of your journey, and that, I mean, that's so cool. Like what your dad, my dad also owned a few rental properties, and I think that definitely helped me, have that mindset of like owning property as just being sort of a normal thing to do, owning rental property. So it's cool that you also had that experience as a kid. Before the show, you mentioned that there was another start of your journey.
Sure.
Would you just speak to that in whatever way?
Sure. Yeah, totally. And thanks for bringing that up. So, um, when I first bought the first property that I bought, which was a primary residence, um, I bought it out of necessity. I actually was getting kicked out of the place that I was living in. And so it was a property that was owned by a relative of mine, and he's a great guy. And through his generosity, yeah, I was able to stay in a place that I really couldn't afford on my own without that. Um, and so um, during the time that was going on, I used to be an actor. So I had moved to New York City from Florida to pursue a career in theater, and Rent was the really big show at the time. It was on Broadway. I had several auditions and callbacks for the show, but also was just a huge fan of it. I mean, it was I think when we were talking earlier, I said, it was like the Hamilton of the 90s, right? I mean, it was just such a cultural
Absolutely.
phenomenon. Everybody knew and loved it. I know you loved it, you had mentioned.
Uh-huh.
And so the story, if anyone doesn't know who's listening to the podcast, it's about there's a villain in the show named Benny, and he was friends with the heroes of the show um, prior to the show taking place. And what ended up happening, he ended up marrying this very wealthy woman, and he became a landlord. And he bought this property that they live in, and he tells them they have to get out unless they pay him a full year's worth of back rent. And he's just this evil character, this evil landlord. And so here I am, sort of getting kicked out of my property, where I was living too. And rent is just something I'm listening to all the time. And I started thinking about, property ownership, and about, landlords, and like, do landlords have to be evil? Can't landlords be a force of good? Can't, and that's something that's started with me back then and has stayed with me, that sort of like 90s sense of idealism through my whole life, through my journey. And, one of the things I really try to do is reinvent property ownership, and change the narrative from this evil landlord to a landlord being a force of good. I just had an article published in Fast Company last week where I'm talking about investment as activism, because I think that landlords can be good people and still make a good profit. You can make money, but still be ethical in the way that you do business, and ethical in the way that you treat people. And that's a guiding principle of mine.
For sure. Yeah, it's so important. Yeah, and it's also, I mean, it's interesting, like Benny is one of the things that I remember about that show is, especially watching it after becoming, a landlord, is, Benny was an evil character, and yet, what he was asking of folks, which was to get caught up in rent, which hadn't been paid for a year, didn't seem necessarily that unreasonable. So there's some complications. It's sometimes not as black and white as, but I thought Rent did a great job of kind of like bringing that to the surface, that it is like somewhat of a complex topic. And yes, and the goal of being a force of good, because we are, as you mentioned earlier, like we're in the business of providing safe and affordable housing for people. We're not in the business of being jerks. Like that's just no one, most people don't want to do that. So,
We just got out of this COVID pandemic, right? And a lot of people did have problems with paying rent. And even before the pandemic, it was something that was really important to us, was working with people. I don't know, I don't remember when it was, but it was in the past 4 years. There was like this government furlough, and we had some people at one of our properties that worked for the government. And remember, the government was shut down for like 2 months, and they were unable to pay their rent. They got paid back retroactively. But we worked with them, and we worked with people throughout all of COVID to have people stay in their homes, work out some sort of payment plans, work with them on helping them get government assistance or assistance from other places. I mean, the bottom line is, as landlords, we have mortgages that we have to pay or we lose the property. So, but we can work with people, and I think there's a like I said, a humane way to do business, and Benny was not doing it in a humane way. I don't think. I mean,
Correct. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, for sure. And that was interesting. We also had a couple of tenants who were government furloughed, and that was actually the most, at least, just for us, like the most actually volatility in people being able to pay rent, but working something out with them. And it just it was really important to getting through it together, as we would like to do. So yeah, so you have a background as an actor. You work in, you and your wife like work in theater. Can you talk about how you see elevating communities through, you mentioned enrichment and the arts as part of like how you want to see communities enriched. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the arts part of it is really more a passion and a hobby of mine. It's my wife's full time job. My full time job is real estate, 100%. That's what I do. Bread and butter is the real estate stuff. But I do join with my wife sometimes on Broadway shows. We'll invest in Broadway shows, or we do you know we've invested in other things, or given donations to nonprofit theatrical groups and things like that, because it's something that's important to us, something that we care about. So I think that, just is a part of me and who I am, and part of my being, while it's not necessarily specifically part of like what we do with the property work, because it's not like we bring a show into to the community, but we like enriching communities. And I think just in general, by donating to a nonprofit theater or things of that nature, helps communities grow and learn. I mean, I've learned and expanded my horizons, learned about different topics and things through theater. I mean, theater can really be a catalyst for societal change, and that's why I think it's extremely important and a wonderful art form. But the community enhancement type of things that we do around a property have more to do with elevating those communities and revitalizing those communities, and making them better, making them safer places to live, by maybe it's an area that needs where we might put in security cameras or do other sorts of security measures we might put in place, or just we brought food trucks into one place, which has been great. The tenants love that. Just trying to figure out different ways to enhance communities, and just make the lives for all the residents better in many different ways. And one of the things we do is we've done a lot of green improvements,
Mhm.
and so I think that benefits the entire planet. But it also directly affects the tenants' pockets, because a lot of times the tenants will be paying those bills, and so if they see a reduction in their utility costs, it's money in their pocket.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. There, you mentioned a lot of different things there. So just to circle back on,
Sorry.
no, that's great. But just to circle back on one of those, I'm curious about the green improvements, because
Yeah.
sometimes I mean, I wonder how you found the motivation to do that. If the tenants were already paying the bills, then how did you work that cost into the sort of business plan?
Well, so a lot of times you can get special programs from the government dealing with green improvements, right? So in this particular case that I was thinking about, is one where we installed, I believe it was around 350 low flush toilets, and I don't know, 132 kitchen aerators, and 132 bathroom sink aerators, and 132 shower heads, because there was 132 units. But there was some half baths and things like that. But we did the toilets, the shower heads, the aerators, and we reduced the water consumption at the property by over 25%. And so tenants saw corresponding. These were a lot of times water is not separately metered for those who do a lot of this business, but these were townhome style properties, so they were, all the waters were individually metered, and each individual tenant did pay that water bill directly to the utility company. So they did see a reduction in their bills of about 25%. But we also saw a reduction in our interest rate. So we got a they have a thing called the Fannie Green program.
Mhm.
And depending on the time of year and exactly what's going on, that program can be advantageous or not. You know, there's many different things. So it's not always the type of thing that is really advantageous. It just depends on a number of different factors. But at the time that we did that, it was advantageous for us in the interest rate reduction. So I think that the way the math worked, it was 2 years to break even on the interest rate reduction versus the cost to do the improvements. So we said, well, that's a no-brainer for us, because we want to, you know, we want to make the tenants happy. We want to do something good for the environment. And if we break even in 2 years, then we're good. And we
Yeah.
actually ended up selling that property after 2 years. Did very well on the property, but we had, I guess, just basically recouped that cost. But the property did well, so it was good.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and then there's all these necessarily harder to see benefits, like, you know, if tenants are paying less for utilities, then they're a stickier tenant base, you know, if they're happier there. And, you know, also, even though maybe you didn't get to take advantage of the interest rate reduction going forward, you know, it was still a smart business play, right? And it was also good
Well,
planted and the right thing to do.
sure, and that the loan was assumable. The person who
Oh,
bought it
nice.
assumed our loan, so they did get that interest rate. But the thing that's really interesting about that property is we did not hit the numbers that we were supposed to hit in our first year from a cash on cash perspective. We did in our second year. When we sold it, our investors were thrilled because we way exceeded our projections. But the first year we didn't, and the reason why was that the tenants were too sticky. So we were actually saving money because we didn't have to turn over these units and we didn't have to renovate the units, but we had projected higher rent bumps from people vacating the units, and then we would renovate them, and we weren't able to renovate as many because so many were staying,
Yeah.
which was a good thing. It's a great problem to have because by year two we were killing it. But yeah, it was interesting, and our tenants loved us. It was
Yeah.
fantastic. I mean, they were paying $100 per month more in rent, and this is, you know, the rents were sub $1,000 a month, so they were gladly paying $100 a month more in rent with nothing done to their units whatsoever, just
Mhm.
because of all the work that we did, because we did a lot of exterior work too. Besides the green program, we really beautified the property a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So, um, I just want to know, like, what did you do to communicate with your investors during that year about the lower cash on cash return? Like, and then I want to circle back to the other improvements that you did, but you know, I mean, that's kind of a tricky situation, right? Like it's harder to communicate when things aren't going as you expected. How did you handle that?
Well, I think all of the investors knew that there's a bit of fluidity in the real estate market. I mean, we would make, and we were very clear with people that we make pro formas, and that's our goal. But sometimes we exceed it, sometimes we don't quite hit it. We gave our first cash on cash distribution on the property after only owning it for 3 months, which is not very typical. So they were happy with that, and I communicate with investors on a monthly basis, so they were kept apprised of what was going on a monthly basis. So they were completely aware of it, and I did a big webinar on our 1 year anniversary and kind of showed where things had been, where they were going, and where we were projecting them to go, and we did fine. I mean, you know, we started off at a 6% cash on cash distribution, and then by year two we were giving over 11% cash on cash. So like it was a good thing. It just took a little bit of ramp up, but I think, you know, I didn't have a single investor complain. And I think it was because we were just really proactive with the communication and very transparent with what was going on. And, you know, turning over 132 units, doing a whole, you know, repositioning of a property like that, it doesn't happen on day one. And so I think they understood that and were, I mean, I credit the investors for being so kind and understanding, but I also will pat myself on the back a little bit about being really proactive and detailed in the communication of what was going on. We didn't have a single, nobody had any ruffled feathers on that one at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think that's probably a testament to both your investors and your communication, and that's kind of what I was like. I think when you communicate clearly, transparently, and are backing up that communication with like, a smart business plan and efforts to actually like carry through, then, then people are understanding that, this is not necessarily a straight and narrow path, right? So, yeah. And and I wanted to touch on something else related to that story, which is you said you did a bunch of exterior improvements, and that was also helped the tenants just basically be happy with, where they were living. What exterior improvements did you do? And can you speak a little bit more about why that was, why that made us for a stickier tenant base?
Yeah, well, I mean, the property was in pretty bad shape. Um, the sidewalks at the property were essentially like reduced to rubble, like they were almost non-existent. And I mean, I have a book that's coming out, and I wrote a chapter all about this property, and I changed the name of the guy to protect the innocent, but the guy who did the concrete work was a character, and I talk about him in the book. But we did all new sidewalks everywhere. And that was the first thing that we did. So as soon as we took over, the tenants are notified, oh, there's a new ownership. And then all of a sudden they see, boom, sidewalk, like beautiful new sidewalks. And, we did landscaping. The the hand railing at the property is the previous ownership had owned the property for 12 years and like would not, I mean, they seemed like lovely people when I met them, but they would not spend a dime on the property, is what I heard. I don't know, I wasn't there. But kind of like the opposite of what I try to do. I try to like spend money and do improvements versus try to make money by cutting costs. So it's part of sort of my ethos of trying to make things better, right? Trying to make improvements and add value to people's lives. And so they had, I guess, for a code reason, housing code reason, they needed to have some sort of railing outside some of the units because there might be a couple of steps down, and they had gotten very thin, probably like 1/8 of an inch. I don't know, really, really tiny metal like pipe, like tubing, like the plumbing tubing thing. I don't know how it met code, but that's what they had. And so we knocked those down and we put in railings too. We did with like nice out of wood, out of cedar, so we did that. We did the concrete. We redid the landscaping. There was problems with water drainage on the property. So we actually dug trenches and did like French drainage. We put some sump pumps around some of the units, and we did a lot of work on the property. And then we went in and we painted. We didn't do a whole paint job on the entire thing, but we went in, we fixed everything. Anywhere there was chipped or peeling paint, the doors were all mismatched. So there was like white doors and blue doors and green doors, and they had no rhyme or reason, and they were all a mess. We redid all those. The interior, so they were townhomes, but some of the buildings were like it was like 4 apartments in the building. And so you would come in and there was like a little interior hall. Those were a mess. So we painted those and recarpeted them. So just those kinds of things. And the pools had like cracking concrete around the outside. So we redid that, poured those, put in some nice new pool furniture. So those kinds of improvements we made. Oh, the garbage. So the garbage dumpsters were in these like corrals that were totally falling apart. So I thought it was very expensive for what we had to do for garbage, but we made brand new corrals that were really nice and beautiful and kind of kept those big garbage containers sort of out of sight and looked nice. And so really improved the curb appeal of the property. And then we did interior renovations as well, but that's the exterior work that we did.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that overview. Just giving folks an idea of like what kinds of things can are needed, you know, to keep a property looking good or bringing it back up to speed. And I think so many the residents just get a lot of, you know, it's their home, and so feeling a sense of just dignity about where you live and feeling like you live in a nice place, it's just it's so important. Everyone deserves that, you know. And so the fact that you were able to give that to them through pretty extensive exterior work. I mean, did you have a did you have a pretty extensive CapEx budget for your exterior work?
We did, and I think the thing about it, I mentioned earlier that the renters were paying $100 more a month for rent, the renewals. It was still the best deal in town, which is why
Sure.
everyone was still doing it. But they were like happy to pay money when they see all these improvements being done and their utility bills being cut, and they're
Of course.
like, "This is amazing!"
Oh
So,
yeah.
um, so it's good. But yeah, I mean, we had a very hefty capex budget for exteriors and interiors,
Yeah.
and that was all baked into the whole loan and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because if you're only increasing rents, did you increase rents more, you know, the second year, or how did that go?
Yeah, so um, when we really made the larger rent bumps was not with existing tenants. It was when a tenant would leave, out of their own volition, because you have that sort of natural attrition and turnover in an apartment building. When they would leave, we would then go in and spend a lot of money renovating the units. We got rid of the appliances and would put in a brand new stainless steel appliance package. We resurfaced the countertops. We would remove carpeting and put in the vinyl plank flooring, that has that sort of wood look to it, and it holds up a lot better over time. We kept carpet in the bedrooms, and anything else that would need to get done, maybe a lighting package or a vanity or things like that, to make the units look really nice. And on the 4-bedroom units, we were able to achieve rents that were ultimately $225 above what they were when we had purchased the property, because that's what the market had, and we were not at the top of the market. We just raised them up to like the middle of the market. We probably could have pushed them higher, but on the renewals, we just inched them up a little bit every year, and I think they felt very comfortable with it, because, like I said, that first year almost nobody left because it was the best deal in town.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
yeah.
Okay, so Matt, thanks for giving us like a little bit of a deep dive into that property. You have
Sure.
you have a book coming out. Will you tell us a bit about that book and maybe touch on some of the themes that that you want to bring to light right now?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So I have a book coming out, and it's called Backstage Guide to Real Estate. And so it kind of has a nod to my theatrical background and still passionate interest in. And it talks about my journey in real estate. And it talks about the things that we talked about on the podcast today, from that green algae pool to rent being a big influence, interesting with a primary residence. And I talk about that. And so it starts off with the earlier version of me, who didn't really know much about real estate at all. And so through as the book evolves over time and I evolve, the topics in the book get more and more into real estate. By the end of the book, talking about topics such as 1031 exchanges and an air rights deal that I did. And it just kind of follows along. So somebody who's picking up this book, regardless of where they are in their journey, they'll be able to sort of follow along. If you're very advanced in real estate, I think you'll find the earlier chapters, while you might not learn too much about real estate, hopefully you'll find it entertaining, because the stories, I hope, are unique, and I've tried to embed some humor into them. Sometimes I think I'm funny and my wife doesn't, but my kids think I'm hilarious. But I try to put some humor in there and make it. Real estate can be books, and just real estate as a subject can be really dense and
Mhm.
difficult to follow. So in telling teaching these, what I call keystone concepts. So throughout the book, I teach 18 different keystone concepts. And there's also a glossary. I go through, like, I think it's around 60 different real estate definitions too. But I'm doing it through telling the story, through telling this narrative. So it makes it really palatable. It makes it like an easy read. That's the feedback I've gotten from my beta readers. They're like, oh, it's so easy to read and like very easy to follow. And the stories are really unique and fun. So I'm just trying to show people how to passively invest, and hopefully, I'm a passive investor. I'm invested in over 7,000 apartment units, but 65% of those are deals that I'm a passive investor in. 35% are deals I'm a general partner. I'm a general partner in over 2,000 units, but the majority of my portfolio are deals I'm passive in. So through the journey, I talk about how I look at passive investment deals and the criteria that I look for. And I talk about the little like kind of tricks that syndicators can use to kind of fudge the numbers a little here or there, and the things that as a passive investor you want to kind of keep an eye on, things that you might want to ask a sponsor, oh, why did you do that? Like that seems a little, and just because they do something that's a little different doesn't mean that it's wrong or that it's a bad deal, but it's just something that people should know, hey, that's a little out of the ordinary, maybe find out why. So that's a big impetus for the book as well. I run a meetup here in Boston, and I have a lot of people that come to me when they're looking at passive investment deals, and they say, hey, what do you think of this deal? And through writing this book, I'm hoping now I could just hand people the book and say, well, just read the book and it's going to tell you exactly what to look for.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a super awesome concept, and just it's so important to communicate effectively about, once you sort of understand real estate, it can be easy to just be really technical all the time. But when we're trying to help other people understand about this amazing, way to invest and build wealth over time and do good in the world, it's really important to meet, to explain it in an interesting and palatable way. So I really look forward to checking out your book, Matt, and thank you so much for being on the show. And is there anything else you'd like to share, way the listeners can get a hold of you? Anything else before we sign off for the day?
Well, yeah, I would encourage all the listeners to go to my website where you can find out more information about me. And also you can download some information from the book or find out more about the book. And all of that's available on Picheny.com. So that's my last name. It's P like in Peter, ICHENY.com. I'm sure you'll probably put a link to it in the show notes. But yeah, come check it out and feel free to send me an email or, reach out to me through the website. I love chatting with people about real estate, whether you own 0 doors or 1 million doors. It's fun to talk shop. So feel free to reach out.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I hope you all check out Matt's book, go to his site, and thanks so much, Matt, for being on. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.